As usually, I'll start with a couple slides and then we'll go right through the demo so that I can show you at least some of the features that we implemented in this release. As usually, this is our major release. We release 4 major releases every year. This schedule we have kept for a couple of years now. So this is CloverDX 5.14 and next one will be at the end of June. We expect to have at least one bug fix release somewhere in the middle of the development of the CloverDX 5.15. As for the release highlights, the interesting things that we developed this release, the biggest one is probably introduction of CloverDX Libraries. And this is our new feature that allows you to easily share various solutions through the server. And I'll explain that in more detail a little bit later. Then we've improved our Secrets Manager support by adding support for AWS Secrets Manager so that you can secure your credentials and do not have to put them into your jobs, but rather you can use external Secret Manager to manage them. And as usually, we implemented quite a lot of updates related to the platform, minor usability updates, and so on. So, as always, Clover is more secure and much better than it was before. If you'd like to see full release notes, as usual, we publish them on our website, excuse me, so that you can read everything there. And as always, we have links to all the issues that we have implemented, so you can see even low-level details if you are interested in something, especially regarding various bug fixes. So let's talk about the big features in this release. The first one that I want to talk about is something we call CloverDX Libraries. This is an entirely new concept in CloverDX. So we introduced a new configuration page on the server, and this is something that allows you to easily share what you have created, typically subgraphs, within your organization. What you usually do now before CloverDX 5.14 is that if you want to share a subgraph with someone, there are typically 2 options. Either you give subgraph and all the dependencies to the other person and they copy paste that into their project, or if you are working in a single environment, you create a shared sandbox and the other user can import subgraphs into that from that shared sandbox. Both of these solutions have a lot of drawbacks. The copy paste is kind of obvious. If you change something in your subgraph, if you improve it in some way, your users or people who are using your subgraph need to copy paste everything again. Oftentimes you forget to give them some dependencies and so on. So this is a very error-prone way of doing that. With shared sandboxes, it's possible to do it. It works well, but it's usually quite cumbersome to manage, especially if you have many such sandboxes where you need to remember which ones are shared because you are using some subgraphs or something from there, and which ones are the actual, let's say, production sandboxes that you have. So what we implemented is a CloverDX library that gets rid of all of that and makes the whole process much easier and more streamlined. The libraries are also fully supported in Designer. So for example, they show up as components in component palette, so you no longer have to find your project, go there and link your subgraph manually, but it will just appear as a new component. Technically, when you looked at the library itself, it's a very simple self-contained archive. It has a clib extension, and it contains full project with the implementation of your subgraphs that you need. So it can include all kinds of resources, whether it's files or other subgraphs that you don't publish, anything you need to implement whatever your subgraphs are supposed to be doing. Additionally, the library contains metadata that describes the public interface of the library, and the public interface is what's shown in the designer. So you can have parts of the library being private. Those are internal to your library, used just for the implementation, and you do not want other people to use them simply because, for example, they are too complicated to use, or they are just partial solutions to whatever you are trying to do. The libraries are created and managed in the designer. So when you create a new project, you have a new option there to export it as a library. There's a new wizard for that allows you to pick the public interface and then define the additional metadata. And when you finish the wizard, you get your library. You can then share this library in any way you want. It's a simple file, so you can send it via email, you can store it in your version control or in some sort of repository that you have. When you want to use the library, that's a bit more interesting because you are installed the library. You need to install the library on a server. That's quite simple, and I'll show you how that works in just a couple of minutes. You basically upload the library to the server. server understands the format and will deploy the library in a way that that it needs to allow it to include it in your jobs. Then whenever you connect to such a server where some libraries are installed with a designer, you'll see new categories in component palette. In my case, on the screenshot in here, you can see two categories. One is called CloverDX Server REST API, and the other one is encrypt, decrypt, lib. And these both come from the libraries that have been deployed to the server. You can, of course, delete the libraries. You can add as many of them as you want. And you'll see that there's quite a lot of metadata available so that you can see what the libraries contain and figure out whether it's something that you need or not. Next feature that we implemented was support for AWS Secrets Manager. So this is an extension of what we've done in Clover 5.13, where we implemented support for Secrets Manager in managers in general, with, again, completely new entity. We implemented Azure Key Vault as the first one, and AWS Secrets Manager in this version of Clover. It works in pretty much the same way. So you can query the secrets anywhere in your jobs, whether it's parameters of your API calls or database connections or anything else. And for example, you can see the syntax of querying as a secret value from AWS like this. And again, I'll show you more on the demo. We have several smaller features. The first one that's probably the most surprising, and although it's a very small change, is changing of the name of the Reformat component to map. This is based on many users simply not being able to find the component that allows them to map from one data structure to another. Reformat is a fairly technical name, so we've decided to change the label. Nothing else has changed, so the component works exactly the same way as it did before, only the label is affected. You will only notice the change when you create a new Reformat or new map component in CloverDX 5.14. So your previously created graphs, they will keep the Reformat name and everything as it was before. But when you want to add a new one, it will be called map instead of Reformat. So you don't have to do anything with your jobs, or it's fully backwards compatible, and your jobs don't have to be changed in any way. You can simply run them. And the same thing happens when you create a job in CloverDX 5.14 and copy it, for example, to previous version, the component will work. And it will have a name map, but it will still work just like the Reformat before. We also made it so that you can search for the component using the old name, because we know that many of our users do not use component palette, especially power users or more advanced users. They search for components through shift space, search dialog, the add component dialog. And when you type Reformat, you will still find the same component. So your muscle memory will still apply and you'll be able to find it just like you did up until now. Now, another feature that will require, in some cases, changes in your jobs is support for OAuth2 in email components. This is something that's mandated by the change in Microsoft Exchange Online. In October this year, they will stop allowing logins through basic authentication or authorization through basic authentication. So you will no longer be able to use a combination of username and password. You will have to use OAuth2. So what we've implemented is support for OAuth2 in these two components, an email reader and email sender. It works just like in everywhere else. So when you create your OAuth2 connection in your job, you'll be able to put it into the property in one of these components. Right? Nothing else changes. So whatever you do with your email, it will work exactly the same. The only change that you'll have to do in October this year is to change the authentication method from username and password to OAuth2. We are doing this in advance so that you have enough time to prepare. Of course, pod authentication methods are supported. So right now, before the Microsoft Exchange team turns off the basic authentication support, you can pick whichever one you want, right? So you can use username and password now and migrate to OAuth2 later when you are doing updates in your jobs that send emails. And a few smaller updates to the platform itself. We upgraded Eclipse IDE, so the backend for CloverDX Designer, to newer version from September last year. This will have no major impact on you. you might notice small visual changes. Maybe some icons are different, but the design works exactly the same as before. This is a backend change. Where you might see the difference is if you are installing additional plugins into your Clover Designer, those might be affected, but it depends on the plugin in question. I would assume that most well-known and often used plugins have no problem with newer versions of Eclipse. This has no impact on functionality of the designer. We didn't change anything, so everything is in exactly the same place as it was before. We also implemented several changes to server side, where we now have support for WebLogic 12.2.1.4, which is a newer version. It's the last version of 12.2.1 branch for WebLogic. The version after that will support in one of the future updates is WebLogic 14. So look forward to that. But for now, we recommend, if you are using WebLogic, to migrate to at least this version, so that you are on the version that is still supported. The previously supported version by CloverDX is not supported by the vendor anymore. We also updated DB2 drivers in CloverDX. So now you can use DB2 11.5 for backend database. This doesn't affect the connectivity to your DB2 data sources or data targets. So your graphs work exactly the same. This is only in cases where your server is deployed with DB2 as its backend. And so in that case, again, we recommend you update to 11.5, which is the latest version, instead of version 10 or something of the driver that we had there before. The previous driver is now not supported by IBM anymore. We also updated Vertica driver. That's a small change. It will allow you to connect to the latest Vertica version. We now bundle 11.1 driver. There's a small difference compared to the previous one. We made many smaller updates to Docker, container image, AWS Marketplace, and Azure Marketplace. None of these will really affect what you do, but they are general platform updates. So we have newer Java there, new versions of Tomcat. We updated several JDBC drivers and related configuration. So as far as the functionality goes, nothing will change for you. But if you rely on specific versions of something installed in one of these stacks, then you should verify whether it still works as expected. And that's everything as far as the theory goes. Let's have a look at the demo. So I'll start with libraries. This is probably the biggest change that we have now. And I'll start on the server, actually. So we have introduced a new page where you can manage your libraries. It's right underneath the boxes. And you can see that I have installed 2 libraries. If I wanted to install a new one, I go into Upload Library and select my file that I need, and that's it. For each library, when I click on it, I will be able to see its metadata. For example, I can see that the version of the library is 1.0 in here. It was created in 5.14 version of Clover, which will be important in future if we support something in one of Clover versions that's not supported in another. You'll need to be able to tell that, so that you know whether the library will work on your system or not. And then you can see the public interface of the library. So these are the subgraphs that have been designated by author of the library as public. So these are subgraphs that will appear in my component palette, and I will be able to use them in my graph. The library can contain much more than this. It can contain files, or it can contain other subgraphs, regular graphs, job flows, pretty much anything else. So to show you how the library is created and deployed, let me actually delete this one first, and I'll redeploy it again. Delete it, and I'll go to the designer to show you how the library is created. So library starts its life as a regular project in CloverDX. I have closed that project, so this is the project. Let's get rid of this. And you can see that it's just a normal project, right? I can have subgraphs. I even have some testing jobs in my library that are not published. This is for me as a library developer, so that I can easily test the functionality in the library. And in my case, the library implements encryption and decryption using any of the algorithms that are available and provided by the security providers that I have installed on my system. So you can see a number of subgraphs that form the interface of the library. I have the decrypt file, encrypt file, and get algorithms subgraphs for that, and the low-level implementation of the functionalities in encrypt, decrypt subgraph. This one is not published, so it's not visible in my component palette. And so to create a library, you just create a project, you create your subgraphs as you are used to, you do whatever you need to do. And then when you want to publish it as a library, we have a new context menu option over here, export as library, which if you select, you'll get the wizard that allows you to specify the metadata of the library. You can select public interface. It will show you all the subgraphs that are in your project, and you can select and unselect the ones that you want to have in the public interface. You can provide metadata about, for example, library author, its name, description, and then of course you need to provide the output file name. So let's change this to 1.1, even though I didn't change anything. And if I finish, I will get a file. I'll override the one that's already there. And to use this, I will need to deploy it to the server, which is very easy. I just go to my server, click on the upload library, and whichever way the library gets to me, I can just select it, open, and the server will deploy the library. And I can now start using that in any of the jobs, in any projects on this server. So to test the library, we're going to have a look at the project deployed in the server. And this is it. And this is one of the jobs that allow me to test it. So you can see that when I opened my job, these two sections are new. These are the two libraries that I have deployed on my server. This is fully dynamic. So if I add a new library now, some sort of a third library, and reopen the graph, because it reads the libraries when I open a graph or a job, I will get potentially a different palette. So this is something that I can very easily use. And the subgraphs that are part of the public interface of a library behave just like any other component. So I can grab them from here, put them into my solution, and then connect them. In here, for example, I can see what it looks like. I can select my settings. And in here, I'm using all defaults. I'm just going to keep it on the default. And I can run my job, and it will run just like anything else I have in Clover. Okay, I need to provide my password and salt for encryption. I'll keep it as this, and I'll see what happens. And when it runs, you'll see that it runs as pretty much any other subgraph, and except the visuals for that, for getting the component into your job is much easier. It's more streamlined compared to having to use some other external sandbox or even copy pasting subgraph into your project. And then I can see my output. And what this subgraph is doing, there is a file that I provide URL to and writes a different one with a different name. So my input file is 650 kilobytes approximately, and the output encrypted is a little bit longer because it contains a few bytes with metadata at the beginning of the file. So this is the encryption. I, of course, have the decryption with it on as well. And I've created this job in the same way. And I went in here and grabbed my decrypt and plugged in into my job. The way this works is that, of course, when I go and search for my components and, for example, search for encrypt, I'll be able to find my jobs in here, and you can see that they come from decrypt library. Right? So this distinguishes them from regular subgraphs that will not show the library name when you are searching for them. And of course, if we go to the server, we can look at the execution history, and we'll be able to see in Job Inspector everything just like you would expect. Right? So you can see the the component being used here with the icon and everything, and you can even go inside it. So if you are in a situation where something happens within your library or within library that someone provided to you, you can still debug it in just the same way like you can do anything else in Clover. The insides of the library are not hidden. In my case, the library is all implemented in Java, so not much to debug in here, but the same principle applies. Regardless of how complicated is the library, you'll be able to work with it just like with anything else in Clover. So where are the libraries? Let's have a look at the secrets managers for AWS. This is actually quite simple. The way you do that is that you start from the server this time. Secret managers are created and managed on the server because they are global entities. You can link to as many as you want. You can see that I have 2 instances of Azure Key Vault in different with different settings, and I have one in AWS. When you want to create new secret manager, what we implemented in in Clover 5.14 is we added support for AWS Secrets Manager. Azure Key Vault was there before. We have 2 ways of authenticating against that. You can either use implicit, which requires you to either have environment variables or Java system properties set like this. This is very useful if you are, for example, running Clover in a container or in some sort of environment where you can inject these parameters into the job, or you can do through access key, where you provide your access key ID and secret access key, which you copy paste from your AWS settings of your secret manager. Each secret manager has settings related to who can use it, so you can select just a subset of users who can use secret manager, and no one else will be able to use this one. So you can make sure that some of your secrets are only accessible to some of your users or to some of your projects. Once you create a secret manager like this, this is what you get, and it creates a new entity, and this is how you reference secrets from your secret manager. In my case, the name of the secret manager is AWS Dev, and since AWS allows you to store secrets which are essentially hash maps, you can use syntax like this, which this is the secret name and key underneath. And this is the functionality that I'm using in my job. The executions in here, get executions in here, is one of the functions that I have in here in my REST API library. So it comes as a subgraph that I have in my library, and it requires server URL, username, and password. I don't have to write them in here. I can just use it like this, right? And the secret called CloverDX server JSON is defined in my AWS Secret Manager, and I can use URL, username, and password because those are the properties of the Secret Manager. I can use this syntax anywhere where parameters can be used, whether it's component properties, CTL code, database connection settings. So you can do this with any value that you want to keep secret. And of course, whatever your secret manager allows you to do, for example, automated secrets rotation or anything like that, you can configure that and Clover will work just fine with that. When you are using secret managers, there's one thing: we cache the secrets so that we can get acceptable performance. Because if you, for example, ran many jobs and needed to query secrets for every execution, it would be quite slow, especially if you are running somewhere else outside of the cloud where your secret manager lives. Like is my case, for example, I'm running Clover on my machine, but my secrets are stored in the cloud. So we cache the secrets, and if you change the secret value, you can push the synchronized secret manager and it will clear the cache. So in case you are getting access errors or something similar, where you are, for example, trying to connect to your source systems using secrets pulled from Secrets Manager, you can use this button to clear the cache and grab new versions of those secrets.